Hey everyone, welcome. I'm Adam Frimmer from DIYPhotography.net, and today we have two very exciting guests, Iain Neil and Mike Thomas, the creators of Module8. And I'm so excited to have you guys here. I just want you guys, if you could, do a little intro for yourselves, let everyone know who we're talking to. Iain, do you want to go first?
I'm Iain Neil, and I've been in the optics business about 40 years, starting off in the let's say the sort of defense surveillance side of things, and then more consumer industrial, and eventually into the cine business, movie business, and of course I used to work for a lot of companies, but now I'm out on my own. And Mike here, who you'll here in a moment. I've known Mike since the 1980s, actually. We started working on some optical designs back then. So this is a new startup company with some very interesting, we hope, exciting product the way it works out. I'll pass it on to Mike.
Yeah, my name is Mike Thomas. I'm also an optical designer. I've been around for say a little over 30 years. Met Ian when he was at Panavision. I've always looked up to this guy. You know, he's really innovated in the space. And when I had a chance to start Module8 with him, I jumped at the chance. Really excited to be able to work with him. And I've been doing optical design in various sorry. I've been doing all sorts of different optical design myself. I've never gotten into the cinematography to the level Ian has. So to be able to bring this new product to market with him has been a lot of fun.
Very cool. So basically, I want everyone to kind of understand. I think you
Mhm.
kind of undersold it right now. I've had the privilege of reading about you multiple times, so I'm gonna ask you point blank. Can you tell us a few of the things that people would maybe know, some of the body of work you've been involved in?
Well, I mean, apart from the early stuff, as I mentioned, the surveillance and industrial, which is probably boring to most people, but the cine work, mainly worked with a lot of, it's been a lot of movies where they want something, a certain kind of shot. And so what I did in my Panavision days, it wasn't just the optical design, there was a lot of different aspects, even building the lenses. In fact, building the lenses in a way is almost, I would say, more difficult than designing them. But anyway, the point is for me that a lot of the optics I worked on, and it's all sorts of stuff, it's the zoom lenses, and lenses with what they call slant focus, where you tilt the focus, all sorts of, and lenses that do different things, different specification. But most of it was driven by movies where the movie people, it could be the director of photography, it could even be the actor, director, producer, special effects people would say, oh, we want this shot, or oh, we need this shot, or we want to give a certain look to the picture. Can you do this? Can you do that? So a lot of the work I did was usually it was one or two movies would want something, but eventually at Panavision we'd build 50, 100 different lenses, and then of course it would be many people would use the product. But the point behind the product was doing something new. And that's actually, if you read my background, that's why I've got all these Academy Awards, because I kept doing, sort of unique or novel products. And it wasn't just lenses, it was even the camera. And of course, we're going back to film cameras. I worked on the viewfinder optics. I worked on the video tap, which is the part that allowed you to see a picture
Yeah,
as you're shooting with film, which
it's
is
something we
is
don't
sort of.
even think about anymore as optics. When you said viewfinder, I had to like readjust for a second. What viewfinder?
Well, the point is it's all different kinds of optics, and then I did work on the I guess the what was interesting. One of them was when we took our film lenses. This is back in the late 90s, and then they were modified to work with a digital camera. It was a Sony camera back then, I'll mention, and that was used on Star Wars. I think it was episodes four. They called it. It was four, five, and six, but I think they called the episodes at the release one, two, three for some reason. So there's interesting things like that. Taking lenses, making them work for digital way back then. This is way before the digital, now. So I work with film and digital and all sorts of different optics, many different kinds. And of course, over the years, we, I say we, Panavision, myself, whoever we put in to see if we get an award. It was just really, it's almost just for interest, but a lot of it was novel. It was unique. It was new. So of course, we managed. Well, I managed to get my name on a few awards. Yeah.
What do you think
Lee,
your favorite movie to
like,
name drop would be?
oh, favorite movie.
Yeah.
Oh, geez. Well, you know what? I've worked on so many, or been connected. It's not like I'm there on the movie for 12 weeks, but I might go to location, or I might there might be special effects. I mean, Titanic was the bit I was involved in was the underwater modifying lenses and bits and pieces with the camera because they had to be put inside a sort of not quite sure what you call it. It looked a bit like a torpedo shape, and they were dropped down in the ocean. So lenses had to be modified. And the Titanic also, I did work to do with shooting I'll call it miniatures. So in other words, not obviously not
They're
full
giant
scale,
miniatures.
but the miniature was like 17 feet long, so it was a
Yeah.
big miniature. And we used, it was called the Panavision Fraser lens, a sort of telescopic type lens that's used at the end of the movie. I think it's almost the last, maybe it is the last shot. So I worked on things like that. So that that was a movie I remember because of various things I do. But I worked on anamorphic movies. I worked on lenses for, geez, I can mention a few: Dances with Wolves and Red October. I did Speed. There was Die Hard. There was a Flatliners. Lots of. I mentioned the ones that I know they're a few years back, but they're sort of classics.
Definitely.
So I worked in a lot of these movies. Sometimes even on the set. Other times trying to develop a lens. I think for Dances with Wolves, the issue was they wanted to shoot. If anybody knows the movie, sort of early on in the movie when Costner's out there in the prairies and he's in a sort of stone hut. He's stuck in this little stone hut out in the prairie, and they wanted to shoot in the hut, in the dark, in the hut, but with anamorphic. So they needed a very close focus. Well, anamorphic lenses, cine lenses, in general, maybe it's changed a bit today, but back then, 20 odd years ago, you couldn't really shoot close focus. It wasn't so easy to do anamorphic. So I
You
worked
still
on
need a
some.
diopter today. You can't
Well,
do
yeah,
it
you could use a diopter, but they didn't want to do that at the time. So I came up with, I worked, not just me, there's others involved. I don't want to make it sound it's only me, but the team worked on anamorphic. I think they were called MAP, the lenses, macro anamorphic panatars is what we called them. So there's been a lot of, I mean, a more recent, well, a little bit later on, still a while back now, Minority Report was interesting because it was that movie was very, a lot of it had to do with the look, this sort of bluish, slightly washed out type of look, sort of the science fiction type look they tried to achieve, and that involved a lens called the Primo Macro Zoom lens, which if you watch the movie again, it's a key shot in the movie. Really, it was used in the trailer. It's used in the movie multiple times, where you start with a shot it's a lady lying in a pool of liquid. Actually, looks a bit like a triangle, like a Mercedes Benz. The triangle in the front of the car. They had the three ladies in the pool, but they were actually focused on one lady on her eye. All you saw was her eye, the eyeball, and then you basically zoom away, and you change the focus, and it's sort of a zoom shot going from a macro focus to a normal focus, and you change the aperture if you need to for the lighting. Of course, to do all this, you have a crane, and the crane has to move the camera, the lens, and of course the head of the crane has to tilt. Everything has to be kept in a vertical, like a vertical line. So the Primo Macro Zoom lens was a lens that was developed in the late 90s, and that was used in Minority Report. It was sort of a key lens. In fact, if you go on the internet, you might even see some stories about it, because it was sort of a key shot. So that particular lens I liked because it wasn't just novel. It was such an unusual lens. You could actually focus about maybe, I would say it was about maybe about 2 inches, or 50, 60 millimeter from the eye.
really.
And it was a wide angle zoom. So you went from quite a narrow field of view to quite a wide shot. So you're zooming, you're moving, you're refocusing, you're changing the aperture maybe to keep the lighting the same, and you've got a crane, and then you've got a motion controlled head on the crane. So that's for those days. We're going back about 20 years ago. That was a very complicated shot to do. So.
Sounds like a field day for the focus puller.
Well, I don't remember who that was. I think the DP. Who was the DP? I'm trying to remember. Gosh, I shouldn't be forgetting the names. I think Jan de Bont, who was a DP actually. I think he was producer, and I think the director was Spielberg, maybe on that movie. I think Kaminsky, Janusz Kaminski, may have been the DP, and of course it was Tom Cruise. I've actually worked on a lot of movies that happen to have been Tom Cruise, but it's just coincidental. Maybe because he always like the movie Far and Away was shot. It's not such a famous or well-known movie, perhaps, but it was shot 65 mm film. And the problem shooting that, you've no depth of field. So a lot of the scenes, they wanted a scene with a bar. It was a bar top, and you had a person sitting at one end of the bar and someone sitting at the other. So the camera was sort of looking down the bar top, keeping the two people talking to each other. But the trouble was you had to keep refocusing on one or the other. So that's where this slant focus lens came from. So we made a lens you can actually tilt. You can tilt. I think in the still photography they call it a tilt shift. We called it a slant focus because actually what we wanted was the slant focus. We wanted the focus to be, you could actually, one side of the picture, it's say, maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 feet, like a meter. The other side, maybe 4 meters, like 12, 13 feet. And everything was in focus.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I
So,
want to touch on the fact that you were talking about that blue shift in, I think you said Minority Report.
yes, yes.
So, on touching on that, like, how is it that you go about designing a lens? Like, what is the thought process between, hey, we need this thing, and
Yeah.
I am going to physically manipulate glass in a way where physics
Okay,
don't
okay,
matter?
okay. Well, okay, there's several ways to go about it, and the way I went about it was because I was sort of like almost like an apprentice. I got mentored by several people at Panavision, so I was sort of taught the business. I was taught technically how to do things. Of course, I knew how to optically design lenses, but there's a little bit of a trick here because the way it works in the movie business is the customer says they have a need. So the supplier of equipment, and I'm thinking now the manufacturer more, but Panavision was manufacturer and they rented the equipment. So a company like Panavision would say, okay, what do they need? So what I had to do on the optics was to take what I heard, like we want this shot, we want this look, we want the blue, we want whatever it is they want, and I had to translate that into a specification. But it's like scientific, it's mathematical. You've got numbers. It's all numbers. It's not, well, we want sort of blue and we want this and we want a haze. I've got to put it into something. So you can put this in a computer. You can actually design a lens. The designing the lens process is pretty standard. You design, you just learn how to do it. It takes a lot of experience. Like a zoom lens, typically you take at least 10 years, maybe 20 years to become proficient designing zoom lenses. I mean, designing them, you build them and they work.
Yeah,
It's easy to design one,
that's
you
the
build it,
catch.
doesn't work. So it takes a long, long time. But the trick to me was this learning what somebody wants. So you've got an artistic demand or need, and then you've got a sort of technical or scientific. Uh, you have to do a sort of a translation into some scientific, technical, like numbers and formula, whatever. Then you design the lens. Of course, there's also other parts like how you build it. How do you build it? How do you make it work? That's actually, in a way, that's the most complicated part. From a technical point of view, I say trying to build it and make it work, especially a zoom lens. So you build the product, then the product goes to the customer, and if you've got it right, they then use it and say, that does what we want. Now, most people though in the business don't get the opportunity to do it this way. What happens is they hear somebody wants a zoom lens and they're told it's certain focal lengths, it's this and it's that, and that's all they know. They never go on the film set, they never meet the actors, they don't meet the writers, they don't know the story, like what's the theme, so it's just they start off with some technical information, they design to that, and then they see what happens. I was sort of brought up, maybe it was just luck, but or the way it worked out. But I was brought up in a company like Panavision who would send me out to the film set or bring in people, the production people, and they would tell me this is what we want. So I would have a very good understanding of what the customer needs. Because many companies, they design lenses and cameras, and they have no idea what the customer wants really. And they say, look, here's our new camera. Oh, here's our new lens. Use it. So I was never really, I never experienced that, at least when I started out. I learned to go and get, involved and become part of the production.
That's really cool. So
Yeah,
basically, you're saying that there's like an artistic component that has to
there's
be
two, yes.
involved in the manufacturing. Yeah.
Well, there's two. There's an artistic and there's a sort of scientific or technical. And
Yeah,
if
yeah.
you read, that's why if you look at the name for the movie for the Oscar people, because people forget this, they don't realize it's the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences. And the reason the sciences are there is because way back at the beginning, when the Oscars, when this all started, a lot of the movies depended on a lot of science, they called it, really technical. But if you go to other awards, I think maybe the British one, like BAFTA, there's no award there for science. It's
Right.
only the artistic side. So the Academy, the US, they call it AMPAS, the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences, look at the overall sort of ball of wax. And of course, what I'm saying here, like you just mentioned, yes, you have to combine the art and the science some of the time. You can't just be the art, and you can't just be the science. Sorry, this thing's popped up on my screen. Sorry if you see that.
Nope. We're good.
It's just one of these warning things. So anyway, yes. So you're correct. Yes. So my sort of my database in my head, my experience tells me you've got to know the artistic side and the technical scientific. You need to know both.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that's a little bit unusual actually. I don't think there's so many people do things that way.
Yeah. And
What do
one
you
thing, just
think?
sorry, I just want to jump in. I think it's interesting to always see how long it takes to do this. Ian says, "Oh, you just design the lens," but in order to get it right, how long it actually takes to design a cine zoom, or how long it takes to design a full set of primes. I thought that's kind of an interesting, to take the guy who's maybe the most experienced at it of anyone, and then say, "How long does
Yeah.
it take?" You'll be kind of shocked, and it shows how much work goes
Well,
into
I'll
it.
give well I'll give an example. The first lens, the Primo zoom lens. This is when the Panavision Primo lenses came out. They sort of set a standard because they were what was called a truly matched set of prime, objective lenses, fixed focal length. They were a matched set, but at the time, this was I would say the mid to late 80s, so it's a while ago. These lenses came out, so you've got all these different focal lengths, but what was also wanted was a zoom lens with about the same performance, image performance. That was a big thing back then because a zoom lens was thought of as a bit of a gimmick type lens, just for a certain shot. And there was a zoom lens, the Primo zoom lens, the first lens developed by Panavision to match these very high quality fixed focal length lenses. That whole project, as I remember it, took about 8 years to get from I'll call it the incubation, the very beginning, trying to lay out a specification, to a final product that was in production. It took a long, long time and a lot of money, but it was sort of a breakthrough because then when the next zoom lens, because that was a certain zoom lens, certain spec, then they say, oh, great, this works, this is great. Let's do another one, different specification, maybe a bigger zoom range. So instead of a 3 or 4 times zoom lens, let's do a 10 times zoom range. Okay, and then that next one wasn't 8 years, but it was still many years. It took a lot of time and effort. So, as Mike just
It's
said, it can be quite a long. You have to be very patient actually with this kind of product, and it's very hard for the person writing the checks for the money because they're seeing the time, the time, the time. But if it works and you produce hundreds of lenses, it works out. It's quite a viable product at the end of the day. So
it's interesting to me that you guys are mentioning time because I look now at where the industry is at the moment, and you have, I mean, just an infinite amount of lens designs from many lens
Mhm,
companies, and a lot
mhm,
of them are, for lack of better words, imitating looks
mhm,
from older lenses, and
Yes.
How do you guys see the current landscape of lenses and lens design,
Well,
especially on
what do
that
you
like
mean? Yeah.
medium to not like high end, so like not signature primes or something, but like
Yeah.
something a little more in the affordable areas. What do you guys think about lenses that are coming out
You
today?
want to say something first, Mike, on that, or no? Yeah. No.
I know. I mean,
I want to
so I
hear it.
mean, it's kind of interesting. So in the early days, I'll tell a quick Mike story. I was involved in Unique Optics, which was a company that made some lenses. We were sort of one of the first boutique lens companies back when the Red One came out, because there wasn't that many lenses around, and we came out with a set of lenses that was okay, that was reasonably good, and we were still struggling with pricing. Instead of costing $100,000 a set, we were down in the $30,000 range set, and now I feel like you can get glass that's equivalent to that for a lot less money. And what I've seen from a lot of the new lenses is like what Iain said before. These are guys that they're they have a piece of the recipe, right? And it's easy to measure a lens, and it's easy to sort of look at a lens and say, here's what people want, but they don't get that last little bit. Like that, to me, they're either always too sharp, or they're too, sort of something.
Mhm.
They don't have that onset experience, that sort of artistic element of it. I think they're getting better and better. But cinema lenses are designed for serviceability. A lot of these cinema lenses that people are using from the 1920s, or
Mhm.
from the 1930s, I'm not sure that these modern lenses are going to quite last that long. So it's almost like it's become a little bit of a throwaway
Yeah.
computer,
Yeah.
laptop computer, where you can have a set of lenses from 100 years ago, or you can buy a set of lenses now for a tenth of the price, but they're only going to be good for 5 more years. These companies are going to
Yeah.
not are going to go
Well,
out of business. So it's not only the design, because people can mimic designs, and they'll get closer and closer to it, but it's really the whole thing of being able to
yeah.
service it, being able to last, and being usable and serviceable. That's another big thing. So
Well, I would throw in. I'll give you a little bit more of a philosophical view. I mean, my view, and that is that the direction for all the years I've known, where now the city business, I'm looking at about maybe 35 years. It's not quite 40, but and what I've seen is the drive towards sharpness, contrast, getting all the aberrations corrected, basically making perfect pictures. In
Mhm.
fact, I even did an advertisement for a software company many years ago, and the advertisement said "picture perfect," and the point was, beautiful sharp images. Now, what's changed is that we've gone pretty much, not completely, but we've sort of migrated from film to digital. Now, for the consumer prosumer, maybe it's sort of like, well, it's digital, it's film, so what? But for people in the movie business, which is really the entertainment business, and television, and maybe to a lesser extent commercials and music videos, but movies and TV, the look of the picture is very important.
Mhm.
And the problem with digital is a lot of the time it's very, I call it clinical, surgical, it's a
Too
very
clean.
clean look. It's actually the look that 10 or 20 years ago with film, you'd say, oh, great, that's the look we want. But now it's like, well, these directors of photography, they're used to sort of softening it up a bit and a fog filter and this and the lighting and blah, blah. Now with this digital way, it's making it too sharp, just to use a word. It doesn't have the aesthetic. It doesn't have the film grain, some of that, analog aspect. It's a bit like a vinyl record, an old vinyl record versus I don't know, an MP, whatever it is these days, or a CD or something. So to me, what's happened in the last well, since digital cameras really got going, I would say the last 10 years, maybe up to 15 years, what's happened is that the demand now in the professional area of imaging is how do we make digital look like film, or a bit more like film? How do we make it film? How do we give it an aesthetic look? And not just with the lighting and filters and post processing, but is there some way we can do it as we're shooting,
Mhm.
but doing it in the lens? So there's been this idea, you'll hear the word detuning or what's the look of the lens. And anamorphic has become very popular now because anamorphic always had a bit of a look, an anamorphic look, which actually means you've got some aberrations. You don't have the super sharp image. So
Yeah.
anamorphic is now very popular with digital for movie making, but also a lot of lenses now, people will take a sledgehammer or scratch the front element or do something to change the imaging. So there's a trend here to what you might call I wouldn't say lenses that have been detuned. I think that's a little bit. I like the word lenses that have a look, a certain look. And there's been a huge demand. I'm sure people know it when they hear me say, oh, well, there's anamorphic, and oh yeah, we could use old vintage lenses, ones that have not been corrected for all the aberrations. So maybe 50, 60 years ago, you couldn't make them super sharp.
Yeah.
But now you pick them up and say, well, they're not super sharp, so that's great. We use them in digital, and guess what? It looks a bit more like film. It's so that to me is the direction. Is the direct. Now I also hear people say, oh, but it'll all swing back and it'll all be sharp again. I sort of doubt it. I think the look is always the key. When you're making a movie, you're not really interested in a test chart. Can we see so many resolution bars? At the end, that's for building lenses. That's for all the technical side, testing the lens. No, the real thing is, how does the movie look? Is the story good? I mean, in the end, that's what really sells it. Story, and does it look okay? Is it nice to, do the actors do a good job? This is what it takes. So the look is important. So I think this, I'll call it the look with lenses, I think is the current thing, and it's going to become. I think it will stay, and there'll be a lot of lens products now which are, you could call them imperfect, almost. I hate to say this, Mike, but almost like non-imaging in a sense. In other words, going away from imaging and making it perfect to imaging and not quite so perfect.
Yeah.
So maybe people think, well, it can't be like that. No, I think that's where it's going. It's just a matter of how you do it. That's the question. How do you do it?
Yeah. Well, there is a lot of price pressure right now. Obviously, there's a lot of new lenses coming on the market that are cheap, right?
Mhm.
And it becomes harder to, I think the people on the high end will always be okay because again, they have the name, they have the reputation, they have the clients, they have the serviceability, the longevity. But in terms of what we've done for Module8, we were like, well, let's come out with something that can be almost an accessory to a lot of these different lenses. Because I
Yes.
think we see people designing lenses that are still too sharp. They don't know the formula. They don't know the right way to roll off. They don't know just sort of what sort of Iain's known for a long time through all this experience. So our first accessory is let's try to give people access to these looks, per se,
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
by letting you use it with any of your EF glass and
Yeah,
uh,
basically what's going on here is we're trying to introduce that aesthetic look with aberrations. So it's not just let's scratch the lens element. We're actually designing the lenses like I do, knowing if you put some aberrations, a little bit of residual aberration, maybe like an old vintage lens, because you can look up patents in different places to find out what these products do. You can measure them, whatever you want. But the point is, you got to sort of, soften up the image, and it's not defocused. People say, "Oh, it just looks like it's a mushed up image. It's defocused." No, it's not defocused. It's actually there's aberration. If you were to with our devices, if you were to go in and out of focus, you might say, "Oh, well, crikey, we can't really find any place that looks really focused." Well, that's because even at the best focus, there's some aberrations.
right.
So we're trying to add this on so you can use existing lenses at the moment. You can use existing lenses, but you can make them look a certain way. And to do this, you have to start out a little bit small. You can't cover all the different lens mounts and cameras and the professional. You can't cover everything. So we have to start a little bit in the small side and say, what can we do to get things going? And that's been that's how we started out. We said, okay, we're going to introduce a few certain looks that we think would be attractive, people would like. But if they want something else, if they come and say, well, can you do this or could you do this kind? We're open to doing different things. But it is a sort of scientific approach. We're not just, well, here's here's a whole pile of aberrations. Do you like it? I mean, if somebody says, well, can you do this? I'll say, well, that sounds like a little bit of astigmatism. So for me, it's how do I create that for the for the customer? Maybe they don't care if it's astigmatism, but so it's just the same as I said before. It's how you take what people want or would need or what they like or and how it fits in with certain movies. You want to have a certain look. If you people talking all the time, you probably want to take the edge off skin tones and detail. If it's panoramic type, maybe not so much, still of people's faces, but small. And then you want more of the panoramic, like anamorphic. So there's already quite a few known looks, and that's what we've gone after to begin with. That's what our products do.
I want to bring everyone up to speed for a second because maybe not everyone knows exactly what Module 8 is or what you're set out to do.
Okay.
But before that, if I can, because we had just left that subject before, I wanted to ask you guys, what is the most overrated and underrated decision when buying a lens today? So what's a decision that people need to get over, and what's a decision that people need to start taking more into consideration when they're choosing a lens?
Geez, I'm not even sure how to answer that. Over and under. Well, I think the over. I hate to say this, but I think the over is branding. I think the branding is a bit over the top these days because even if you get a branded lens, are you really? I don't want to mention companies or names, but if you buy a lens, uh, let me mention a car company instead. If you buy a Ferrari, you would hope the car's made by Ferrari, right? And I think these days I can say uh, they're probably made by Ferrari, but you might buy a Ferrari and it's made by somebody else. So the branding, I would question. I think it's a bit over the top. And then I think why people, when they buy certain uh, products, it's even connected with the branding. Oh, if we buy that brand, that car will do 150 mile an hour, but this one will only do 120. I think there's a lot of bragging rights involved. It's not just the brand. It's like, oh, the lens will do this, will do. I think a lot of that is going out the window it's partly based on what Mike was saying earlier, because there's so many companies now. I don't want to say the new companies do as well as the old companies, but I think it's sort of converging a lot. In fact, I'd even say that a lot of the cine, the high-end stuff is moving a bit down market. There's still always the niche, the high end, but I think there's a lot moving, and there's a lot moving up market. I think, when you talk about consumer, you need to think, well, there's really prosumer now. You pay a few $1,000 more for a lens, but you get something that's almost up market. I mean, towards the top. So I think there's a lot of convergence. So I think the branding and just what people think they're getting, that technically I think it's almost like they're misinformed, that what they're really reading is the past, the history.
Yeah.
I don't know if you agree, Mike.
No, that's a good overrated. That's a really good overrated. I would say underrated to me is just the complete focus on sort of maybe paying a little bit more money for something and serviceability, because right now people are saying, okay, I'm going to buy the cheapest set possible from an unknown company who might not have quite nailed, what these things should look like, and saying, boy, if you would have invested 20 or 30% more money in maybe a different brand, maybe in a different up and coming brand, and those lenses are going to be with you for 10, 15, 20, 30 years versus, going for the absolute, going for the absolute cheapest glass, and then in a year they don't do all the focal lengths they promise. They change their anamorphic ratio midstream. I mean, consistency, and not just sort of in really saying, do I believe that this company has a future? I mean, there's so many sort of almost like in the anamorphic space, there's only going to be one or two people that survive that, and there's a million people jumping into that space. And if you bet on the wrong thing, you're still putting out a lot of money, and you're probably going to have to rebuy those lenses again from whoever sort of survives it in 3 years.
Yeah, I would add one thing, and that is, I think the cost of the product is coming down. And I mean, it's not just because it's cheaper made. I think the technology and everything's evolving a lot. Um, but I think, you know, when you, as I said, I'll give you the Ferrari example again. You know, if you're buying the Ferrari and it's made by Ferrari, there is that niche, that high end, and it's there. So what I was mentioning is where you start getting names put in products, but who makes? I mean, the cell phones, I think, is probably a good area to look at. You know, you've got the various cell phone companies and they've got the various lens manufacturers. I mean, I think there's enough articles on the internet saying, you know, that's just a sticker put on a cell phone to say what the lens is, but
Yeah.
who knows where the lens is made. So that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
And then you got the lower end where, well, you know, the brand is not really that important, maybe. And then, you know, what you're buying maybe is the technology, which seems funny because it may be the cheaper product. So things are, you know, things are changing. It's an evolving situation. I don't know whether it works out.
The real thing no one wants to hear is, I think, the most overrated thing ever in the history of cameras and glass is full frame for cinema. So
Well, that's a
That's
literally just a pivot to sell more stuff. I mean, S35. I mean, you know, God.
well, that's an interesting. Yeah, that's
35.
That's an interesting point, Mike, because the drive in the last, I don't know, 5, maybe 10 years, I've lost track, you know, pushing everything to full frame. Well, that may be not where the market really wants to head. Because when I read about Netflix, Apple, I don't know who else, I can't think of, Amazon, whoever it is, you know, these newer production companies or studios, I hear things like, well, there's a standard now. All we care about is whatever you shoot, the final result must be 4K. They don't care if you shoot 8K, 2K. Well, if you shoot 2K, it has to look good at 4K if you up-res it. But the point is, they're sort of setting standards. I never remember anything like this with film. And what this is doing is sort of driving the products. It's driving the products, the spec. You know, what do the products do? And actually, if you think about full frame, there's probably no need to have it, but things have been going that way. On the other hand, one of the newer, I'm not going to mention the companies, but some of the new cameras coming out are now what they call Super 35. Basically, it's half a full frame turned 90 degrees. Okay, in other words, it's the normal cine format. There are cameras, digital cameras coming out or have come out. You can buy now, and they call it Super 35. It's basically half a full frame. And these are being bought up because they work 4K. You can shoot, especially television. You can shoot. So there's sort of two things pulling at all this. One is where maybe the manufacturers want to go. That's what I guess. And the other side is what you actually need to produce your material. Whatever it is. You know, your movie, your television, whatever. So I think there's sort of two things pulling there. That's how I see it.
There's something really interesting about how we're talking about the over and underrated things. They almost seem conflicting in the sense where you say, okay, so try not to go for brands, and then on the other side you say, but longevity is important and serviceability, and these kind of almost inherently go with going with the brands. So
Yes,
I want
correct.
to detract a second from what and how you buy, and more like in terms, if we just look at what a lens does. What am I supposed to look out for if I want to upgrade to a better lens set? What's like the underrated
Well,
quality of the lens?
the most important thing today is the look. I mean, I think and what, so you might say, okay, well, what's the look? Well, if you talk to lens companies, they're not really very forthcoming with the look. Like nobody wants to tell you the formula, the elixir, the what do you call it, the recipe. They don't want to tell you what it really is, but it's the look. We've got our look and they've got their look. But the look, generally speaking, is don't focus, sorry to use the word focus, but don't concentrate so much on sharpness, ultra high resolution. You still need a certain resolution, but you can let that go a bit and get good contrast at the low to medium resolution. That generally is what's wanted. And it's good with digital because it takes away some of that digital look, which is this sharpness. So it's high contrast, it's sort of medium resolution. but not giving up on high resolution. It's still there.
Hmm.
So it's a bit like in the old days with film, and you'd say, "Oh, we're using the best film stock," but it's really sharp, so we'll use a type of mist filter just to take the edge off. To me, the contrast the lens produces, I think, is the most important thing. There's a few other things that go with that, like it's sort of good not to have too much color fringing and other, sort of certain aberrations like color fringing around the picture is not so good with digital, because once you've got it, it's a bit hard to get rid of it, even in post-production. So there's some characteristics with digital lenses like no color fringing or around the picture. A film lens you probably wouldn't bother, but the new digital cameras, digital lenses, so you don't really want much color aberration. You want this sort of almost uh, more emphasis on contrast than resolution, but not giving up resolution. It's still there. It's just that you put the emphasis on contrast. To me, that's the two. I don't know. Maybe you've got other ones, Mike.
Yeah, if I'm buying a lens, I know just from designing lenses that usually you're struggling to get things perfect at its fastest f number, right? You've got your fastest f number or t number in your mind, and when you're at your maximum, that's where you're sort of pushing the lens to its limits, right? So that's where maybe you're going to see a little bit of especially from a new manufacturer. You might see some inconsistency at that. Like someone's going to push an f1.4, right?
Hmm.
So an f1.4 on a new brand, it's really cheap. I might want to test a few of those because I don't like variation in the lenses. I don't want to see inconsistency, right? So at f1.4, I would say, okay, if I'm really shooting there, I'm going to either look at them on camera or on projection. I'm going to make sure that it's symmetric. I'm going to make sure I get a good copy of the lens. I know that Lens Rentals was really into that, and I would probably back off of that and say, if I'm going to shoot f1.8, I'm probably not going to buy an f1.8 set of lens. I might go a little faster because I know that that's where it's going to be compromised, and I can back off a little bit and take out a little bit of the fussiness of the aperture. But I look for consistency.
Yeah.
Consistency is important because I think that's what I find that a lot of the new lenses don't have, is that you can put up 5 different copies of the same lens and get 5 different projection results, which you don't get with maybe some of the more expensive things. I think what you're paying for in terms of expense is again serviceability and maybe consistency.
Well,
So
yeah.
I look for that when I'm buying a lens, and I also look usually to back off a little. I'll usually buy something. It's okay to buy something faster, but I'm not necessarily expecting to use it at that fast speed because I know that's where people are pushing, sort of pushing it to its limit,
Well,
and I might
yeah.
see some compromise there.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think there's a couple interesting points, technical, I can give you that maybe people viewing would like to hear. Um, when you talk about, a T or an F, sorry, depending T or F, whatever it is, cine or still type consumer. When you're looking at f1.2, f1.4, a lot of this is bragging rights. If somebody's out there in the street, look, I've got an f1.4, oh, I've only got an f2. Now, is it really that important? Well, first of all, there is the issue, does the lens work well at f1.4, like what Mike just said? The other issue, though, is, but it's more into the really high end, I would say, cinematography. 1.4 is actually really good to have because it reduces the depth of field, especially when it's full frame. But you need a good lens. So a lot of lenses are 1.4, but they're not really usable.
Right.
There are some that do. There are some that are good at 1.4, and you probably have to pay more for them because you'd expect to pay more. So there is a purpose for a 1.4 lens, but it's a bit like 2% of the movie maybe, or 4%. Well, if it's a commercial, it might be the whole commercial. But generally speaking, would you shoot everything at 1.4 just because of the depth of field? I mean, the focus puller alone would probably be dead by the end of the movie. So you'd have to have autofocus. It's going to get tricky. So there is a purpose for 1.4, but it's a limited purpose. And then you've got to be careful. You've actually got a lens that works well there. Typically for full frame, an f2 T2 is good enough, and for anamorphic, about an f2.8 T2.8. In fact, even with both of these, you could probably push the spherical lenses, the regular, I call them the flat lens. You could probably push the flat lenses out towards a 2 to 2.8 would be fine. maybe a
Okay.
2.5 or something. And then the anamorphic, usually they're almost always pushed out towards 4. It cleans them up a little bit, but you still get that sort of look you expect with anamorphic. So, you get an anamorphic lens, it says it's a T2 or a T23 for cine, the T number. But in reality, maybe use it 2.8 a bit, but probably more like T4.
Yeah. Maybe you want to cut this part out, but the other most overrated thing, I like thinking of overrated things, is if you're a content creator doing YouTubes or music videos, whatever, the whole concept of T number for a non-professional like massive movie shooter. I mean, at this point, coatings are really, really good. Your focus tables are done in terms of F number. You've got a Sony. I shoot on a Sony FX3. I've got as much ISO adjustment as I want. I can go pretty high in ISO with low noise. That I'm not like going, oh boy, I'm losing a quarter of a stop or a half a stop when I'm shooting some quick and dirty thing.
Yeah, Mike.
You know,
The rule of thumb is normally if it's F2, you add 10% off. It's T2.2.
right.
That's the rule of thumb. And
Yeah,
if
I've
you're talking
always
about a two,
How it's not really relevant anymore, is it?
that's the point. That's the point. The F number is no. The F number is relevant for depth of field,
yes.
and it's still relevant. In fact, it's important. That's why I
Yeah,
mentioned the F14.
very
But
cool.
but the T, well, let's say it's F2, okay, and then the lens is T2.2. The most important thing about that, I would say, is the depth of field. Because the camera, the latitude, the dynamic range, or whatever you want to call it, used to be it used to be 2 to the power 10, like 1,000 to 1 with the film. Then it went up a bit higher. Now we're at, I think for digital, I think some of the camera companies think, oh, 2 to the power 16. I mean, we're way out at 32,000 to 1. So really, I mean, it'd be a bit odd if you shot something and said, oh, geez, I need a T.9 lens now or an f.9 because I can't get the shot. It's not going to happen. But the depth of field does matter.
Yeah, the
Right.
depth of field is driven by your F number, but the T number now to the average guy shooting
Yeah.
an FX3, just shooting something quick, it
Mhm.
doesn't matter. Just change your ISO by a tiny amount. So when I see sort of the T number marking on a cheap lens, it's fine. They can do it, but I think that's a little bit whatever.
It
No.
sounds cooler. It's clout.
It's kind of, it
It's
sounds
yeah. It's
yeah.
well, you have to justify paying thousands of dollars more. So you say, well, it's got a
Well,
T
it's a
number,
cine lens. It's T number marked. Yeah,
That's an
yeah,
extra 500 right there.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I
Exactly.
think we've talked a lot about
Mhm.
where lenses have been, where they're going, what we like. Tell
Mhm.
me now about Module 8, because I saw Mike at NAB and I was
Mhm.
blown away by it because it's such a unique and separate approach from what, a lot of the things we were talking about today about,
Mhm.
adding a mood or a look to your
Mhm.
lens or doing some funky stuff like you said, taking a sledgehammer, people putting Vaseline on the front.
Yeah.
There's been all these things in an effort to make lenses a little bit more unique or to get to take off that digital feel, which I think is a really nice way to
Yeah. Yeah.
to address the
Yeah.
issue. So
Yeah.
what is Module 8 doing now
Well,
for the
let me
people that
talk
are
a
looking?
little bit. I'll talk a little bit in the technical in the background, and Mike can
Yeah.
get into some other things. So the background with me is I've been looking at how to change the look for 20, 30 years. Um, even back to these days with the Star Wars movies, actually the last three. But the thing is, today what I've seen happening when you talk about the sledgehammer and all this, to me it's all random. It's a bit of a sort of random. Let's just try something and see what happens. So I was interested in can you do something a bit more scientific, controlled, and also, if you could make it variable, not the look specifically, but the strength of the look, you can then mix up the look, how you set it for the strength with the aperture, just that we're talking about, where you can change the gain or the sensitivity of the camera. So I was interested in the variable aspect, but also that it's scientific. We actually create some aberrations. We know what they are. So I looked into this. This is going back, at least, well, it's 5 years ago when I really sort of, said, can we come up with some optics, not just an idea now? And what I'm known for, one of the areas I'm probably best known is actually zoom lenses. I've been working on infrared zoom lenses, visible zoom lenses, movie, uh, point and shoot consumer, all sorts of different, even one that never made it up into for the Mars for the rover, which never made it unfortunately. But anyway, so I work many zoom lenses, different applications. Okay, so my thinking was, well, how about you have a sort of, let's call it a mini zoom lens or something like that. And let's say if you sort of move the lens elements, a typical zoom, you know how lens elements move, lens groups. But how about you don't bother about things like the field of view or the magnification? So when you move the elements, you're not looking at, oh, is it a different focal length, but is it giving you a different strength of aberrations? So my idea and what became an invention, hence the patent application. I turned this into a lens, an optical device, and as you zoom, well, first of all, you zoom, and what you see is a change in aberrations. If you think about aberration, you've heard of spherical aberration, astigmatism, coma. There's all these terms. So can you introduce one or two or some mixture of these aberrations controlled? Can you introduce that as you zoom? Maybe you start with nothing. So in other words, you put this, we call it the tuner, between your lens and your camera, and at one position you wouldn't know the tuner's there. I mean, probably not. Okay, the imaging looks fine. Okay, it looks normal. But then as you zoom, let's say as you make the elements move, or you turn the ring or whatever it is, so you vary the tuner. What happens is you introduce, say, spherical aberration. It increases. So this was the technical sort of background, and I don't think I've ever heard of somebody saying, well, we've got a zoom lens, but what it's doing is it's actually introducing aberrations when you zoom. It's not changing the focal length or the magnification. So that's how I came at it. And the other thing about it was, well, we'd like to do this in a very simple, compact way. So can we do something you add on to an existing lens? We weren't looking at, oh, let's design a complete brand new lens system with 20 lens elements and somehow you do this. We wanted to do something, it's like a sort of something additional, like an accessory type approach. So that was the idea, and with this you can design the optics, like what I did, for all different kinds of aberrations and mixtures of aberrations. But to do all this, you've got to have the whole. If you're trying to design and build something, you basically need a company to do it. But the company, what it really is an infrastructure. You need to know about all sorts of things to pull this together. And that's actually when I approached Mike, and Mike can tell you the next bit.
Yeah. Well, this was interesting because when I saw the technology, it's coming at a point where you're starting to see these very look specific lenses. I mean, I probably shouldn't mention, other companies or whatever, but there's lenses you can buy now with sort of baked in looks, and then you could buy one set that has this strength and one set that has this strength and one set that has this strength. And it's like, we could have gone that same route and said, okay, here's a set of lenses that are $10,000-$15,000 each from us, because we could design a full prime. I've done it. He's done it. I mean, no problem.
Yeah.
But then it's like, okay, well, what set do I invest in? And is that look going to be in vogue in 2 years? So the variable aspect really grabbed me, and I'm like, okay, we have to do this. But again, even then, it was like, God, what if our L1 look isn't in vogue next year? What if there's a different look? I'd rather buy a set of sharper primes, a lower cost thing. We're trying to be more accessible and let people change that however they want with a simple device. So for me, it was like taking the work I had done with Moment, which is kind of an adapter company, and tries to get out to as many creatives as possible, and then lucky enough to know like the highest end guy in cinema and say, let's put this out to as many people as we can. Let's give access to these lenses, these looks that are reserved for people who are willing to spend $10, $15, $20, $30,000 a lens. Most people can't afford that. So let's put that tech into the people's hand, into the creators' hands first, and let's try to do it with this adapter. So it's kind of a bold thing to do, I think, because I mean, Iain's used to putting out taken a year, 2 years, 3 years to design a set of high-end lenses, and they are sort of, they become almost instant classics, right? But of course, you're putting out an adapter and you're saying we're going to do this and that, and you see the comments on YouTube, and some people think most people think it's great, but we get the occasional, oh, I could do that with poking a hole in the lens or spitting on the front element or whatever. And it's like, yeah, there's a lot of ways to do it yourself, mess up a lens, but I love the fact that I can take a sharp set of EF primes, like something like, I like the Sigma glass. They're really, really sharp, but they don't have a lot of character. Now I can give them 3 different kinds of characters, and I could adjust it to my heart's content. That's a pretty powerful little combination of glass there. And at the end of the day, if our 3 looks go out of vogue and we come out with 3 new looks, you still got your base lenses. You're not going, oh, you're not trying to sell, you're not trying to sell an expensive set of quote unquote detuned lenses. To me, I'd be pretty nervous spending, unless you're a rental house. I'd be really, unless you know that's the look you want for, like, locked into for the next bunch of years.
Yeah,
You're about to, put up 40, 50, 60,000 bucks for a specific look that you're tied to. Woof. Better hope that's your look moving forward.
Well,
I want to put you under the scrutiny of Ian's prerequisites for designing a lens, because he was talking about listening to whoever's requesting the lens. Was there a similar sort of process when deciding not only the requirement for something like the Module 8, but also the first look that you guys went for on V1?
I'll use the ice cream analogy. You go and you look and you see all the tubs of ice cream, right? And you say, well, there's the strawberry, there's the vanilla, there's the whatever it is, chocolate, right? So if you make those, everyone's going to buy them, right? Then maybe you've got the one with the cookie crunch or something in it, or the one with some lime or something in it. So there are certain looks, as opposed to ice cream, but certain looks which people like. It's well known. You can read it in the magazines, the American Society of Cinematographers, the British Society of Cinematographers, the French. You can read and you can say, oh yeah, they like using that vintage lens. Now, what does that vintage lens do? It actually turns out for a lot of the best, well, I call it the best, the ones that people seem to prefer, the ones they like, the character or whatever, you tend to find that it's old vintage lenses, it's certain kinds of lenses. And a lot of these lenses, there's actually patents, there's actually information. So I can look at patents from years ago and say, oh, there's the technical, I can actually put it in the computer and say, oh, there's the aberrations. So whether I look at the lens and project the lens and see the imaging, or whether I put the data from the patent in the computer, I can see what the lens is doing. So there's certain aberrations, certain characteristics that people like. It's well documented. Then there's the other ones you can maybe create. Certain people say that would like this or like that, and then there's just some new ones maybe you can throw out there. But the point is, we're not just creating anything and saying, well, there you go, there's a look, take it or leave it. We're trying to, basically, it's what the name of the product means. It's called the tuner. It's not just tuner, it's the tuner. The idea being that this device can tune the image. So we provide versions that can tune the image to a specific look. We can say, well, that looks like such and such, or this looks like such and such. This one maybe is a little bit not quite the same. So that's what we try to, we're trying to do that. But the thing is, as Mike said, if you come into the high-end market, we'll call it the cine market, you're more into developing complete lenses, systems. It's big money, takes lots of time, just like I mentioned with the zoom lens earlier. Maybe not 8 years, but certainly a year, 2 years is possible. So that to get into that it's a big thing to do, big development process. You couldn't really do it for a startup. So all the things we're doing are so far is more, I call it consumer prosumer. So it goes up towards the high end, but not right into the high end. It doesn't mean you could not do the high end, but that I think is a much more, that's That's a bigger development. So that's because people say, well, why can't you do this and do that? Well, you have to start somewhere. It's if you were to start a car company, maybe you start with Tesla, but would you start with Ferrari and try to compete? I think that because I think of Ferrari. I keep using the name, but whoever it
We
is,
lost Ian for a
Lamborghini,
second.
I think of them as being that really, really
I
high
still can't
end.
hear him.
Okay, so if you were to start, would you try and develop and compete against them? Probably not.
Yeah, we
I don't
lost you
know,
for a
Mike.
second.
We lost you for a bit.
Yeah, we lost you for a little bit there.
Oh, you did.
Yeah, but
Oh,
the other thing that Module 8 sort of recognizes, again,
oh,
we wanted to start in the prosumer to like the high end, consumer, the highest end of the prosumer, right? So again, when you're delivering, if you go out and you actually get a set of these lenses everyone loves, the Baltars or the K35s,
mhm.
and you're going to shoot and you're going to project them on a screen. You shoot them at T25 or T35, and then your final deliverable is the iPhone or the iPad, right? I think what you're always people are. I'm always surprised is that how good those vintage lenses actually are. People expect them to be like really messy. They're actually not. And if you shoot them for a smaller screen, I sometimes don't even see the
Yeah,
effect. So
yeah,
allowing us to say, hey, this is if you're shooting something for a 120-inch home theater or for a real movie, you're going to want to maybe use our
yeah,
lowest strength. If you're trying to get the vintage lens look across on your iPhone or your iPad, a deliverable like that, giving people the ability to crank that strength up and actually be able to get some of that
yeah,
vintageness to it is one of the strengths of the
yeah,
device. Because again, if someone goes out and spends $100,000 on a set of Baltars and then shoots content for Instagram, they're probably going to be
right.
disappointed. They're probably going to be disappointed
Probably.
because people aren't going to really see
Yeah,
the result of the money they spent.
yeah, yeah.
Do you
Or with
think
us, they
that
will.
the Module 8 is at par with the higher end glass? Do you think that somebody could make like include the Module 8 into a
Okay,
feature
okay,
film?
okay. To answer that, the issue is that the way lenses are designed and built, um, it's not so easy to uh, put something between, say, a cine lens and a cine camera. I don't know. You must
Right.
know. I mean, you
Under
must
the
know.
assumption that we're using like crash cams, like the
Right,
FX3,
right, right.
I
I
don't know
mean,
if maybe the RF is
Yeah, yeah,
a relevant mount,
yeah,
but
yeah. The problem is that it's very simple. If you buy extenders like Canon 1.42 times extenders, you can put these on the back of a lens. I mean, it's telephoto lens, right? And then you've got the camera, okay? But they only work for telephoto. If you go to shorter focal length, wide angle, you can't use the extenders. So there's a sort of limit. There's a physical limit to what you can do with certain kinds of lenses because of the way they've been designed and developed over the years. So that's why I say if you want to do a lot of high end, if you want to figure out how to do high end, it's more complicated. It's not as simple as what we've been showing. So we're that's why for us it's a lot easier. It's simpler to have um, something you can put on. I'll call it a still, consumer prosumer type lens. Um, so it's not so much can you do it or can't you can do it, but it's another it's a step up. It's a sort of almost like a quantum leap, and it means it means you're going to get a lot more involved. It's a lot more complicated. So for trying to start with something, better to start with something that's simple, practical. It's sort of realistic. We can do it. It's not going to take us 3 or 4 years, and we're going to have all sorts of difficulty. So what we're doing is applicable anywhere, but it's just a matter of what it takes to get there. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's
no, definitely.
yeah.
I just want to wait for Mike to come back, and then we'll do
Yeah,
a
yeah,
quick
he
wrap
popped
up.
out there. Yeah, yeah, he's yeah. I thought I was
Very
saying the wrong.
interesting stuff. I'm
Yeah, yeah,
blown away. There's so many
yeah,
angles and
yeah, yeah.
I guess things you don't come across them, especially like
Mhm.
myself being a DP. It's so
Mhm, mhm.
weird for me to hear like the I guess the mindset go to choosing a lens. For me, it's always been like, you know,
Mhm.
I don't have the vocabulary to say why I
Sorry.
like Kowa. I just do.
Sorry.
Yeah.
And you know, like or a
Right.
Leica R set. For me, it's just I don't know. I
Yeah.
put it on the camera and it looks cool. I don't have that like
Yeah.
nuance that both of you have kind of introduced here in saying like why there's this like underlying appreciation for certain types of looks. So I really think that this Module 8 thing that I was lucky enough to actually use at
Mhm.
NAB, it blew me
Mhm.
away because it just I can only imagine where you guys are going to take this.
Yeah.
So really, first of all, thank you both for giving us the
Yes.
time,
Yes. No, no,
uh,
no. You're welcome.
sharing
You're
that
welcome.
information.
Yeah.
Mike, if you want to tell us how we can buy them, I think is the Kickstarter over or are we still going?
No, we're going. We're going till the 26th of May. So
All right.
yeah, and it's the best pricing you're ever going to see on these units. So if you're interested in trying it, it's a really good time to buy it at Kickstarter because you know we give 30, 40, you know, 50. I think we're down to the 50% stuff sold off, but it's still like 40% off MSRP. So it's a great chance to get into it.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, and CSA, we're going to be at Cine Gear as well, booth 203.
Mhm.
Anybody who wants to come down and can they play with it at Cine Gear?
Yeah, June 1st and 2nd, I think, is the
I
exhibit
think,
in
yeah.
Paramount Studios. Yeah,
All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
that's where we're going to
Yeah.
get grilled. We're going to get grilled by the deep. That's going to be where we get grilled because there's going to be a lot of guys at Cine Gear who are doing episodic TV and movies. We're
Yeah.
going to say, blah, blah. So we're ready. We're ready for them. So come by and say hi and see a
Yeah.
demo.
Yeah. 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 That'll be good. That'll be good. Be
All right.
interesting. Be
For
interesting.
anyone who's interested in seeing this live Cine Gear booth 208, was that it?
203.
203, booth 203, Module 8 will
Yes.
be there. You guys can play with it. I really recommend it. Again, I was blown away by it. The fact that it's a zoom lens behind your lens that changes the way it looks, all of that is awesome. You guys are gonna love it. So again, Ian, Mike, thanks so much for jumping on this call and
No, no, no,
we'll
no,
Thanks, Adam.
no,
awesome.
no, no. It's fine.
Take
It's
care.
very good. Thanks for it. Thanks for your time as well. Yeah.
Bye bye.
Okay. Okay.
Take care.
Bye. 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 Bye.